So, what does all that technology mean? What can it do for us? When we think about HANA and the ability, the opportunity to shatter this barrier that has existed between OLTP and OLAP, or between structured processing of information and processing of unstructured information, or between being able to build new applications or legacy applications and so on, we have to, one of my conclusions is that we have to also rethink the notion of performance itself. We have to rethink the notion of benchmarks and so on. The reason I say that is, I mentioned earlier, we have more than 2,000 customers of HANA already, and 1,000 or so implementations of various, 1,100 or so implementations of various sorts. And the amazing thing that I found was that we have now 27 or 28 customers who run something in HANA at least 10,000 times faster than they did before. So they are in this 10,000 club. And it's quite an extraordinary situation. Yodobashi was the first example of that. A couple of years ago, Fujisawa-san told me that he is the head of IT and operations at Yodobashi, and he's also the son of the owner of he's from the founding family. So his grandfather founded the company, and his father is now the head of the company. So he told me that they have 22 million total customers in Japan. So that's 22 million. And out of those, 5 million are loyalty. So this is total. And what they do is, they used to do in our ERP system on an Oracle database, once a month they would calculate what incentives to pay these guys based on the purchases made by them as well as the purchases made by everybody. And this was a 3-day long run on our ERP system on an Oracle database. And when they ran this thing on HANA, this ran instead of 3 days in 2 seconds. So that is a performance improvement of approximately 125,000 times, which is a very, very large number. That is difficult for the human mind to comprehend this. So when you look at 10,000 times performance improvement, that is basically like if you were to walk from San Francisco to New York, and compared to that, if you were to fly there, if you were to continuously walk at the speed of 3 miles an hour, and instead of that, if you were to fly there in like 6 minutes or so, then you would be 10,000 times faster. So that sort of gives you an idea about how much faster 10,000 times is. Usain Bolt is about 10,000 times faster than a snail. 10,000x faster than a snail. It's an interesting way to think about it. But anyhow, so 28 customers in the 10,000 club. And the reason this happens is that if you look at the Yodobashi example, they were doing this on data that is operational in nature. So every last transaction, it is not aggregated. They have to look at every single transaction that has come in. It's a very complex query. They want to calculate the purchases made by everybody who bought the same things that this person did. So when you take a combination of a complex query, and it's a large amount of data, it is 22 million records, 22 purchases made by 22 million people, so that is probably a few billion records. So large amount of data, complex questions, and on unaggregated, on real operational data that is changing as we speak. This is the kind of a combination that enables HANA to achieve dramatic performance. So how do we think about this in a more scientific way? Well, my sense is that when in the age of HANA, we have to rethink the concept of performance itself and rethink the notion of benchmarks for information processing systems. And I wrote a paper about this at the ICDE conference in Australia earlier this year. And I think that it comes down to 5 dimensions of performance. So there are 5 dimensions of performance. These are Dr. Sika's 5 dimensions of performance by Dr. Sika. The first one is, of course, the data size. Typically, the larger the data, the slower the system gets, and so forth. And the second one is the query complexity. How complex are our questions? The questions can range from simple scans and relatively straightforward joins, which also can be pretty time consuming, to highly complex statistical analysis, medians, finding medians, percentiles, doing clustering analysis, and other kinds of complex analytics on data. The more complex our questions are, the longer it takes and the slower the performance of the system and so forth. And then the third one is, let us call it the the rate of change of data. How quickly does the system absorb new information? A fourth dimension is the data prepared or is it raw? And finally, it is the response time. How quickly can we get our questions answered? And ideally, we can get the questions answered in less than 3 seconds, because psychological studies show that the human brain starts to lose attention. Typically, we start to lose attention at greater than 8 seconds. At less than 3 seconds, we can carry out a task more or less continuously, and at less than 1 second or less than 800 milliseconds, we can basically operate on the system with interactivity, with real time, in a continuous flow of thought. This is the way our brains, our senses are wired. So, how much is the response? So when you look at these 5 dimensions, and I believe that HANA, the more of these 5 dimensions are in there, the more HANA's performance stands out. So a simple way to think about the value of where HANA would really demonstrate tremendous value would be when we take more and more of these 5 dimensions and think about what kinds of scenarios do we have which exercise these 5 dimensions and bring HANA to bear on those scenarios in the business. And it turns out that there are, as many as we can imagine. This is only imagination is our only limitation when we think about the kinds of things that we can apply this to. So there's a paper that I have written about this that you guys can take a look at, and we will make that available. And we have been starting this recent effort to rethink the concept of performance benchmark itself, given the abilities of HANA.